Welcome to the In Love with PMDD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Rose, your PMDD relationship psychotraumatologist, and I help you stop the monthly PMDD breakups. PMDD is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It is in approximately 1 in 5 women, and it makes you want to break up with your partner approximately 1 to 2 weeks before your period every single month. So as someone who has suffered with PMDD for over 18 years, I dedicated my doctorate practice to helping partners navigate those monthly PMDD breakups with everything from attachment styles, triggers, sensitivity to noise, sensitivity to touch, all of the things that you really struggle with when you're in PMDD. And I also dedicated my dissertation to a phenomenological study of the relationship experiences of partners of individuals who suffer with premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So I'm not just here to help the sufferer, the one who is suffering with PMDD. I am here for the partners as well. So if you need those private sessions, make sure you go to inlovewithpmdd.com and get those tools. So let's get into this week's PMDD trauma transformational tools that is going to help you stop the monthly breakups and stop the suffering and stress in your PMDD relationship. Let's get into it. Today, we are going to be talking all about the anxious style PMDD partner. So PMDD partners with this attachment style, they normally crave physical and emotional closeness when they go into PMDD. Sometimes they can fear that they're not good enough. They often worry about if their partner is going to cheat on them, if they're going to be betrayed, if they're going to be left or abandoned by their partner. So being pushed away by their partner can actually make them feel more anxious. So if you listen to the last episode, you know that my PMDD partner has an anxious attachment style. And what this means is when PMDD comes, he is constantly needing me to reassure him that I'm here for him, that I'm not going anywhere, that I'm not cheating. All of these things used to really trigger me because, like I told you, I didn't like being questioned. But when you have an anxious style PMDD partner, you really have to validate them and answer those questions and not be vague, because being vague means that you're not giving a lot of details. So if your PMDD partner is asking you about your whereabouts, if you're asking you about what you're thinking, make sure that you're really in a place that you're providing them with knowledge of what's going on with you so that they don't have to worry about it in their brain. Because what happens is they get really anxious. If you tell them something and it's not enough, then they're going to begin to think the worst. Catastrophizing. This is when your partner will think worst case scenarios. So catastrophizing is very common when you have an anxious attachment style, because you start to freak yourself out about, oh my goodness, what if they're going to be with someone else? You know, if they don't pick up the phone when they were supposed to pick up the phone and you call them, they don't answer, they can say, oh my goodness, they're not answering the phone because they're with someone else. And they're, then we're going to break up. And oh my goodness, if we break up, then what are the kids going to do? What's the dog going to do? Then I'm going to be left alone. I'm never going to find another person. And it's this catastrophizing, meaning you're spinning in your head with all of these intrusive thoughts about what you think is going to happen because you're so anxious and you're not getting what it is that you need, which is really information from your PMDD partners to kind of ease your mind. So the anxious attachment style is a type of insecure attachment style. So you have insecure and then you have secure, and this can stem all the way back from childhood. And a lot of times, according to the research, it is based off of childhood and the connection that your partner had to, their caregiver, right? So having this attachment style in childhood can really affect your relationships later on. So if your partner or you developed an anxious attachment style in childhood, you're going to bring that right into the relationship. And that's where the problems come, because attachment is the ability to make emotional bonds with other people. It's your ability to connect, to feel safe, to feel heard and validated. And it all starts with the way that you're relating and connecting to your partner. So if you had your parents weren't there for you a lot when you were younger, then you kind of developed an anxious attachment style because you automatically think that your partner is going to neglect you. And this can come from meaning you had a lot of separation early on in your childhood where they kind of just left you. You didn't really know where they were going, what they were doing. You didn't feel secure that they were really going to be there. It could be inconsistencies where your parents were there and then they weren't there. And so there was never really this balance and the safety of having, like, I know my mom or my dad or my caregiver is going to be there. Or maybe you had a parent that was really just inexperienced, meaning they just did the best that they could. And again, this is not about, talking bad about your caregivers or your parents or whoever took care of you. It's about recognizing the impact that had on you having a relationship present day. So individuals, PMDD partners with an anxious attachment style are often categorized as being really needy. So they're anxious. They have low self-esteem. They don't have low self-esteem because there's something wrong with them. They just have it because they believe that they're not good enough and they feel like they need to constantly prove themselves to you. This is something that is so evident with my PMDD partner. He shows love to me by doing things. He always thinks he has to earn my love. He thinks I need to do these tasks or do these acts of service in order for you to continue to love me. It's not that I can just freely love him. He needs to feel like he's up to par. He's earned it. And then that's the only way that he really feels secure. So if he's really hard on himself when I'm disappointed with something that he's doing, like if I tell him that he's done something wrong, he takes it so hard because he starts to feel like if I do a bad job of something, then she could potentially, take her love away from me. And that's the fear that's embedded from having this anxious attachment style, where that's not what I'm saying. So if you have an anxious attachment style, it's pretty hard for you to accept constructive criticism from your PMDD partner. Meaning if you get into PMDD and your partner says, hey, I don't like that you did this, like you'll take that really, really hard and think, well, fine, just be with someone else then. It's kind of that all or nothing thing. You could be like, well, you'll either do one or two things. You'll be like that and just say, you'll dismiss it and say, okay, we'll just be with someone else. You must really not want to be with me. Where your partner will just be like, no, I didn't say that. I just said that I didn't like this particular thing. And it makes your partner who has an anxious attachment style even more anxious to know that they're not doing something up to standard because they immediately think that that's grounds for you being with someone else. So I have to be very careful about how I tell my PMDD partner that I don't like certain things, and I have to know that he takes them really hard. So there's this balance of when you find out that your partner is that type of person that always, goes to worst case scenario and takes everything so hard, you could think, well, I'm just not going to communicate anything bad to them. I remember I had a time in my relationship where I'm like, he can only hear the good. Like he's fine if I'm telling him that everything he's doing is great. But as soon as I criticize him in the least bit, all of a sudden he begins to think, I'm not going to be with you. And it just causes all of this stress and drama that I was like, I'll just keep it to myself. Well, what happened is I wasn't communicating how I genuinely felt, and I began to resent not being able to openly communicate. And it wasn't helpful at all because none of my feelings were getting addressed. I was holding everything in. I was consistently being triggered, but I felt like I couldn't bring up my triggers because my partner couldn't handle it, which made me resent them even more because I felt like, well, if they were just able to handle the truth, then none of this would be happening. So I began to resent my PMDD partner because he had that anxious attachment style. And I began to think maybe I should be with a different PMDD partner. Like there's all of these thoughts because I'm like, well, I can't keep this in forever. Like, because I'll get into the mindset of, okay, I'm doing this for a little bit, but can I keep this up for the long haul? Can I consistently just not say how I'm feeling? Can I consistently put my feelings on the back burner because my partner feels a certain way? And that was the wrong answer. I had to get to a point. And I'm going to give you the tools to do this, but I really had to get to a point where I communicated how I felt, whether it was good or bad and different, in a way that my PMDD partner was able to understand. But holding it in is not the answer. And I know that's the immediate go-to so many times. It's just, I'm just going to be quiet and not say anything about it. And I'm telling you, that's not the answer. So individuals PMDD partners who have an anxious attachment style, they just want to be close to you, but they're afraid that you don't want to be close to them. And that means that if you're unsure whether your PMDD partner wants to be with you, you're going to be consistently checking in with them to make sure that they want to be with you. And sometimes that can seem really overwhelming for your other PMDD partner who's not anxious, and that can actually make them avoidant. So then we have the anxious avoidant attachment style, which are the opposite of being needy. So instead of wanting to be emotionally close, they actually avoid connecting with their PMDD partner. They rely on themselves. And I know what you're thinking, anxious and avoidant. You can have a mixture of both, but they really get really, really independent. And this attachment style, meaning their parents, were probably unavailable as a child. So they may have had their needs rejected, their emotions rejected, and they had to learn how to self-soothe. And in order to do that, they just withdraw and kind of go in their own corner. So they learn to avoid closeness, because they never really learned what it felt like. And so now they just avoid it altogether. They act like they don't need it. So what it is when you have an anxious avoidant attachment style, when you go to cope with stress and change, it causes you to be really, really anxious, because you're kind of used to having that, routine where you're like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But if anything changes, you're starting to feel like you're freaking out. You can't handle it. You're starting to think worst case scenario, because you're only feeling safe when you're in that routine. So for the anxious avoidant attachment style or the anxious attachment style, this is normally caused from trauma, from neglect, early separations from your parents. Maybe if you had a long period of hospitalization where you were just by yourself. Like I said before, inconsistency with your parenting that you got earlier in your life, and like that emotional response where your parents were there, but they weren't really there. They were present, but they're not really present. Maybe your caregiver, your parents had depression. Maybe they had a disorder that caused them to not really be connected. And then maybe you just had an inexperienced parent where they just were doing the best that they could. They didn't really know anything better. And they kind of felt like you should just be able to, survive on your own. So here are some signs if you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't know if I'm anxious or if I'm avoidant. Here are some signs that you have an anxious attachment style when you go into PMDD. Are you afraid of your emotions of intimacy and emotional closeness when you go into PMDD? Are you wanting to pull away when a person gets really, really needy? Are you disregarding other people's feelings? Are you the type of person that doesn't really have boundaries? Do you need constant reassurance? Has your partner, this is a really big one, has your partner ever called you needy or clingy? Because our partners are normally the ones that can call out our attachment style, because they're not necessarily saying you have an anxious attachment style, but what they are saying is that this is too much when I go into PMDD. So if you go into PMDD and if your partner says you're being needy or you're being clingy, and that like, well, yeah, but I just need you to do this. I need you to tell me this. I need to feel a certain way. And you become obsessed or overly fixated on your partner and how they make you feel. Or do you get really anxious or jealous when you're away from your partner, when you're in PMDD? Do you start to wonder what they're doing? Do you start to really need them to be close? Like you're fine when they're close to you, but then all of a sudden when they go somewhere and you don't really know what they're doing, it causes you to have anxiety. A big one is if you have a tracking device on your phone. If you're tracking your partner's location, it is a strong indication that you have an anxious attachment style. And what I want you to know is, I know that so many PMDD partners get so defensive because they're like, no, I just have this for this reason in case of an emergency and all these things. This is just an indication, but I don't want you to feel bad about having an anxious attachment style or an avoidant one, because I'm going to give you the tools to manage that. But yes, having your partner's location on is fine. But if you are consistently checking your partner's location, where are they? At this time of day, they're normally here. What's going on? that means you probably have an anxious attachment style when it comes to being in PMDD. And this is really going to impact your PMDD relationship. But it's important to remember that an anxious attachment style doesn't mean that you weren't loved as a child. It just means your emotional needs were probably not met as a child. And so this can only be sometimes when your partner's in PMDD, meaning you may feel really, really secure, like I do, like my partner does, when your partner's not in PMDD or when you are not in PMDD. And we're going to go over what that looks like. But I want you to just think about whether you're the partner that has PMDD or you're the partner that doesn't have PMDD. Think about if you're feeling like this when your partner goes into PMDD or when you're in it. Are you having this anxiety, this neediness, this clinginess? And if you are, I'm going to give you some tools to use so that it doesn't really affect your PMDD relationship. The first thing is the communication. This is so important. When you recognize that you or your partner has an anxious attachment style, you have to learn how to express your emotions and ask for what you need. So if you have an anxious attachment style, ask your partner for what you need. And if you're the partner that doesn't have an anxious attachment style, be willing to communicate. You have to overly communicate to an anxious attached PMDD partner. You have to give more details. You have to explain yourself more just to make sure that they feel secure. You can't just say, I already told you that, or that's what I used to do. I used to be like, I already told you where I was going. If your partner asks again, answer them. Don't get bitter and resentful and vague, because all that's going to do is trigger the PMDD anxiety even more. It's really going to trigger it, because I used to think I was doing the right thing by thinking, oh, my partner needs to self-soothe. So I'm going to stop, overly communicating with them so that they can learn how to survive on their own. It's kind of like if you know that an anxious attachment style stems from childhood a lot of times and the inability to self-soothe, you can wrongfully think, okay, I'm just not going to tell my partner anything. It's like not picking up the baby when the baby's crying. That's not the thing to do. But sometimes you think, oh, that'll help them build resilience and all these things. What they need is emotional closeness, because if not, they're going to be more needy, more anxious, more clingy, more all of these things. And that's what I had to learn. I'm like, okay, so not communicating is not helping my PMDD partner. Communicating helps my PMDD partner. The next thing is, I'm going to give you some examples. Being pushed away by their partner can make them feel even more anxious and increase their clinginess, like I told you before. So for the person that is suffering from PMDD, if you feel anxious towards your partner during PMDD, understand the effects of that energy on your PMDD partner. So I don't want you to demand attention and affection and validation from them, because they're probably not going to give it to you. If you're like, you need to just love me more, you need to give me more attention, all of these things, I want you to use my JBL method. My JBL method is just be loving and allow them to come to you with the attention that it is that you need. It's like a butterfly, right? So if you try to chase the butterfly, it's going to continue to run away because it's too much of that anxious energy. But what you can do to get that attention, that validation, that security that you need is let them know what it is that you need, and then give them space and time to give it to you. Don't demand it, and don't put it in a box of making it feel like, oh, it has to show up this way. It has to look this way. Don't criticize. Well, you didn't tell me you loved me enough, or you didn't show me that you loved me enough. Because if you start criticizing your PMDD partner for what they're not doing, they're just going to do less of that. So if you are the PMDD partner and if you're feeling anxious and you begin to question the thoughts and assumptions that are going on through your mind about your PMDD partner, if you start to feel suspicious and wanting to ask more and more questions to feel more secure, do your best not to transfer that anxious energy on your PMDD partner, because when they're in PMDD, it's going to be too much for them. So if you're feeling really, really anxious and you're like, I just need this from them, I just need that, give them a minute. Give them a minute. And a lot of times they will come to you and find a way to self-soothe on your own so that it doesn't seem so overwhelming. I know for me, the way that my partner really gets the best response from being anxious is when he just calms down. I remember one time I told them this on a recent visit because I knew that he was in that anxious space. I'll tell you one of the tools that my PMDD partner did. He's not really like a gamer, but he got a game on his phone. And what that game was anytime that he was feeling really anxious, really insecure, he had something to put his focus on that wasn't me. So he wasn't like, and I see when he did it on his own. He came up with this tool, so I will completely give him credit. But when we would be hanging out, if I would be going and doing this, and he'd be like, I love you. And I'd be like, love you too. And then he would I would go do something else. He'd be like, I just love you so much. I'm like, I love you too, babe. And then I go do something, and he's just consistently needing that, but it was excessive, right? And then I would get to the point where it's like, babe, I got it. I love you, you love me. We have to move on with life. We have to still do other things. But he just wasn't feeling like it was enough, and so he still had that anxious energy. So he started playing this game on his phone. I don't know what it is, but he would sit down on the couch and he would just start playing the game. What that did was it redirected his mind from those catastrophizing thoughts that were thinking worst case scenario, right? Because your mind is spinning. You're like, oh, they don't love me. They're searching, for eye contact. They're not really looking at me. They're pulling away from me. All of these things that you're thinking in your mind. And he stopped himself from going down that rabbit hole of all of those things. He started to play the game, and it kind of really helped him out from spinning to the point of all of his anxious energy being poured onto me. So the last tool is get customized PMDD trauma transformational tools help with my private sessions. So if you know that you have trouble with your PMDD relationship when your partner goes into PMDD, it's a good idea to talk it out and get something customized to your daily routine. So that goes into one of the two offerings that I have that goes along with this mini series, and that is my attached to PMDD course. And what that is it is modules that you can review on all of the attachment styles, whether it's the anxious, the avoidant, or the secure attachment style. And then I also have sessions with you. It's a 2-month program, and I have sessions to where I customize the tools for your specific PMDD relationship. I learn about you, I learn about your PMDD partner, and then I give you the tools of what you can do, things that you can put in place on a daily basis, on a weekly basis for your PMDD relationship, so that when you go into PMDD, that you're not getting into this mindset that you have to break up because you're consistently being triggered because your partner is being clingy, or you feel like you have to break up because your partner is getting really, really avoidant. I'm going to give you the tools for that. And if you know that that's something that you need, go to my website, www.inlovewithpmdd.com. Go register for that course. And the other offering is my attached to PMDD book that you can buy, that's really just going to lay out all of the attachment styles specifically for PMDD. So you don't have to do those monthly breakups, but recognize that everyone who has PMDD has an attachment style, right, in their relationship. Some is anxious, some is avoidant. Next week, we're going to be talking about the avoidant attachment style. But if you notice when you're listening to this episode, wow, that's me, I'm the anxious attachment style, don't feel bad about it. I don't want you to feel bad about it. I want you to know that I'm going to give you the tools to do something about it so that it doesn't damage your relationship. But don't beat yourself up. Don't think that you have to change who you are. Recognize the attachment styles with PMDD are very cyclic. So when you go out of PMDD, you'll probably have a secure attachment style, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. And that's probably what you have in your follicular days. So just recognize if you have this anxious attachment style all the time, or if it's just when you're in PMDD. That's what I really want you to get from this episode and these tools. Do you have to implement these tools all the time, or just when you're in PMDD? You can message me on Instagram if you have any questions about these two offerings, which is the book Attached to PMDD, and then also the Attached to PMDD course. I am in my DMs 2 to 3 hours per day on Instagram, or you can email me, Rose@inlovewithpmdd. We got this. I hope this PMDD episode helped you and your partner in your struggles within your relationship. And if this is something that you know that you need help with and you need further support, individualized support, make sure you're going to inlovewithpmdd.com and you're getting those private sessions to really work through what you're going through in your relationship, specifically in regards to PMDD. And also, I want you to leave a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts. What this does is it helps other PMDD sufferers and partners find this show that can help them get these free PMDD relationship tools. I remember what it felt like to not know that there were tools out there specifically for PMDD relationships. So I want to make sure that you are sharing these tools with others, share them on your social media, share them with people that you know that are also struggling in their PMDD relationships. Until next episode, this is Dr. Rose, your PMDD relationship psychotraumatologist. One more thing, I almost forgot. I now have the Fresh Start PMDD Partners workbook. What this workbook can do is if you've had past traumatic experiences with your partner, past fights, past arguments, and they keep coming up every single month in PMDD, I created a Fresh Start workbook so that you can deal with all of the traumatic experiences that have happened in the past in PMDD rage and all of these things so you can stop going through the same cycle again and again and again. So get that workbook. It comes with a video episode of the actual podcast that I recorded on getting a fresh start in your PMDD relationship. So you're not continuing the same cycle again and again and again. So make sure that you get that workbook. And if you need those individualized counseling sessions, you know where to go, inlovewithpmdd.com. Until next time, we got this. Love you.